Welcome to 5 and 5 from the one-stop co-op shop where I discuss 5 key elements of a game in about 5 minutes. I'm Michael Kelly, and today I'm looking at the A.R.T project, the solo and cooperative game of rescuing stolen art. And disclaimer that I was sent a review copy of this one. The A.R.T project is a crisis management game in the vein of Pandemic, which is not always my bag, but how does this one do? Let's find out and get to the list. For my number 5 point, I'm focusing on the variety of maps in the game, and for my taste, this is a pro. So there's 6 different maps. You start out with Japan, which has no special rules, but then go into Egypt and a whole bunch others. They often change up the way movement works, change up the configuration of the map so that when you lose cities and have your movement restricted, it's going to have different effects. And none of them are super complex or super confusing. Also, none of them are going to change up the core gameplay, so if you don't like the rest of the game, it's not like the maps are going to fix that for you, but I do appreciate the different rules they bring in a pretty flexible and straightforward way. I think it's a really nice touch to give a very small game a lot of extra value. My number 4 point for my taste is a mix, and that's the way the game ramps up the difficulty and tension as you go along. So you're trying to rescue these different pieces of art, and as you get each one, you're going to be placing them on this track. You got to fill it to win. And as you go further along the track, it's going to become cheaper to spend radios to unlock these ally dice that can help you battle in combat. But you're also going to be raising up the starting value of the enemies in combat, making it tougher and tougher for you to win. And on the positive side, this does its job. It makes the final battles in the game always tense, always tough. You got to get your whole team together to have a chance. But on the negative side, the growth and the ramp up is really consistent and in some ways a little bit repetitive. You have to buy the ally dice, I've found, at kind of a consistent rate. Otherwise, the values just get away from you having a possibility of winning. So it's not a huge knock against the game, but it does feel like it follows a similar flow each time you play. Now, speaking of combat, it's my number 3 point, and it's a pro for my taste, although it might annoy a lot of people, because it can be very random. You roll some dice, and that was pretty good, but sometimes they're just terrible. You can see my playthrough of the game recently to see that in action. But what I like, even though the dice are random, is that you have a very clear idea of what values you need. You have things like guns that you can use to spend and gain more power, so you can kind of see what your possible rolls are pretty easily. And then you also gain the ability with extra mission cards that you're holding to discard them to re-roll your dice and mitigate your luck further. So yes, it's random. Yes, it's frustrating when the dice don't go your way. And yes, some players might enjoy this less than others, but I find that it has enough choices and enough predictability in it while still keeping things exciting that it's a pretty good dice system. For my number 2 point, I'm focusing on the resource management in the game, and for my taste, this is a mix. So you've got 3 main resources: fuel for movement, guns for combat mitigation, and radios to buy those ally dice to help you in combat. And you're constantly, through the mission cards I'll mention in a moment, losing these resources and gaining them, and then hearts become a wild resource that can fill in for anything else. And the puzzle aspect of this is interesting. It's tough to know when it's the right time to use your resources, when you want to hold on to them a little bit longer. If you run yourself out of too many resources, you're going to really limit your options with other things and maybe force yourself to use some of those wild hearts. And the second you lose your last heart for any player, you lose the game. But that's also where the negative comes in. At least for my taste, this is a little too much zero-sum and a little too harsh. And unless you're playing on one of the lower difficulty settings where you have a bunch more hearts, I've often found in our games that somebody will just make like a small mistake, and then suddenly they'll be down to a single heart, and then just the wrong draw, just the wrong combat roll can kill them pretty easily. So this is a game where you're going to have sudden losses pretty frequently in my experience, although you can, of course, play better and prepare for them somewhat. So I do find the resource management, for my taste at least, a bit too punishing, but others might really love that aspect. And then finally, for my number 1 point, I'm looking at the mission cards, and this is generally a pro for my taste, and this is kind of the core mechanic of the game, the most interesting choice you make. So each turn, each player gets 2 cards, and they're going to have them discard some resources, place some of the agents you need to fight on the board, and gain some resources. And then the cards also become icons to mitigate your dice luck and re-roll dice. And they also become icons that you're trying to get groups of 3 of to place art on the board. So this is really, again, the big decision you're going to make each turn. And I think it works well for cooperative play because the idea is you can freely describe and discuss what's on your card, but you can't show each other the cards. And in my experience, it does lead to good communication. And also with that resource management. It leads to some fun kind of if this, then this kind of decisions. And I think these are intriguing choices. Although I will say, as one little knock on the game, the true solo mode has you drawing 3 cards and picking only 2. I do find that less interesting personally than co-op play or multi-handing, and I also find it more challenging, which I think is kind of the intent. They wanted to make a harder solo mode. So solo is my least favorite way to play the game, although I just do a variant and multi-hand it, which you're not supposed to do, instead of playing with the official solo variants. So overall, you might want to check out the A.R.T project if you like pandemic-like or light cooperative games where you're working to beat a clock and manage crises. This one has a lot of cool mechanics to it, and especially if you like variety, each of the maps has their own fun flair. But on the other hand, you might want to avoid this one if you're looking for really deep tactics, if you want exciting things to happen every turn, because sometimes you just kind of wait around and build up resources, or if you don't like dice luck, although it is pretty minimal in this game, you have lots of ways to mitigate your roll. And if you want to see the game in action, I already have a solo playthrough of it on the channel. But for now, good gaming, and I'll see you at the next stop.